And we're live. Welcome to Music Matters. My name is Jason Tramm, and thank you so much for joining us for our unique podcast community where we explore the issues and challenges of the performing arts as seen through the eyes of distinguished colleagues. Thank you so much for being here, and we just recently hit 1,600 subscribers. Thank you so much for helping us grow. Remember, smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on our upcoming guests and topics, and subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, all those fun places. And you can check out our past 210 episodes on our website at www.jasontram.net. Here on Music Matters, we explore classical musicians, rock musicians, indie singers-songwriters, Broadway artists, and everything in between. So today's a really exciting guest. We have Mr. Brian Bricklin, who is an extraordinary musician, singer-songwriter, audio engineer, and pretty much everything. He's been working on records, and he's been in the music business his entire life. We're delighted he's here. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So glad to have you. You've got an incredible career, and you've been in the music business, we were saying before, since you were 10 years old. Tell us about your journey as an artist. How did you first start?
Well, I first started, I'll tell you, I fell in love with guitar when I saw the cover of Get Your Ya-Ya's Out by the Rolling Stones, 1969. I was 9 years old. And Charlie Watts, I think, is jumping in the air, the late, great Charlie Watts. And around his neck is a Gibson SG. Or maybe it's on the, I don't have the image in front of me, but there's a Gibson, which is a manufacturer of guitars, Gibson SG on the cover. And I just fell in love with that guitar and that album. It was just an incredible record. And that sort of started. I said to my parents, please get me a guitar. Will you get me a guitar? And of course they did. And I started to teach myself. Had a couple, back in the 60s, it was a little different. Had a couple of people come by and, give me a few lessons here and there, some friends of my folks. But it stuck. And that's really what started, my love for, the guitar.
Did you come from a musical family?
My parents are both psychologists, but they both are musical. My dad has sung opera. He did The Saint of Bleecker Street.
John Carlo Menotti, a lovely piece.
And my mom sung on the radio, as well as her mother, my grandmother. I think they lived in Maryland. I'm not 100% sure it was, but it was somewhere south of here, where I am. I'm in Philadelphia. And they both, sung on the radio. So yes, there was, some, musicality in the blood, if you will.
So a family of singers and some psychology. Always good to keep musicians on track, to have a psychologist on staff.
I suppose so. But, they wrote a book called Bright Child's Poor Grades, and it became a bestseller.
Wow.
I remember when I was like 5 or 6 years old, they were on the Tonight Show. And it was in New York City, and I was in the control room, a little kid in the control room, and they were guests on the show. And, but they were very influential. They, as far as sharing music with us, in fact, I believe my parents, showed us the Beatles, showed us the Rolling Stones early in life, all this music that they enjoyed. Queen, my father turned me on to Queen in the 70s. And, my love for rock and just music in general, started there. And, what can I say? Immediately, and my brother, who's 2 years younger than me, so I'm 10, he said he started playing drums. So we had a band together by the time we were 9 and 11. I was 11 and 9, and we loved it. It was our whole life. The whole family was, about, we would rehearse, and then we'd maybe play at teen center, or we'd play like an elementary school assembly, these kind of things. So it was really a great, exposure to music and upbringing.
Now, you and your brother went on to perform all over. Tell us about your performing days.
Well, it's interesting. In the beginning, that's all we wanted to do. I mean, it was almost by the time I was 11, I knew what I was going to do. I was going to play guitar. And Scott, we were going to write songs, and we were going to be in a band. There was really, from a very early age, we knew that. So we started we had, this is an, I don't know, I'm trying to remember exactly. So I think it was in 1970, I was taking lessons now at a little music store near our house. And there was a little fair playing, and there were some kids playing in front of this church that was across the street from the music store. And the guitar teacher had his window open, and he said, "You can play lead guitar. I'm taking you over. They don't have anybody that can play lead guitar." And I was 11, and they were 12, I think. And he walked me over there, and he said, "This kid can play lead guitar." I think they were trying to play Johnny Be Good, and I could play it. So anyway, I just plugged in and started playing, and we started jamming there right on the thing. And then I guess we, parents exchanged numbers, and we became a band. And we first were called Bones, and then we were called Open Road. So now I'm like 12 and 13, and the lead singer, Larry Graves, who I love dearly, he and I started writing songs together. And so by the time we were like 13, 14, we had 3-4 hours of material, maybe a couple hours of an hour and a half of original material, and like 2-3 hours of cover songs. And my dad started managing us and booking shows for us. So we played everywhere. We played on TV. We auditioned for the Al Albert show, which was one of those showcases for young performers. But they didn't we were kind of scruffy. We were into we were into rock and roll. Our hair, we had the arrowhead hair, just like this. And they were like, do they wear anything else? And my dad was like, no. So we didn't get on the show. But we played all kinds of gigs, and of course that morphed into my brother eventually came out from behind the kit and became the lead singer of the band and learned how to play guitar. And we started writing songs together. And he started writing songs by himself as well as I did too. And so we put a band together called the Schoolboys, and we turned a lot of heads. We got to play a lot of shows all throughout the region. And that led to records in Italy, Germany, Canada, France, I think, Spain, maybe. These were singles deals. So we had producers that we worked with. I had a what do you call it? A mechanical drawing teacher in like junior high school. And he had a little recording studio. He had a TIAC 4-track, and that's sort of where my love for engineering started. I saw how the music was being recorded and music production in general. So at a very early age. But anyway,
so you were interested in that right at the that
right
at
the
interest
beginning.
Right away.
Right away, I saw this TIAC 4-track, and my dad had given us this little Tandberg tape recorder, reel to reel, that you could put either side and record. So I was the guy that was doing that. But I mean, it was just a tape recorder with like one microphone plugged in. We'd record one side and we'd play the other side back and play along to it, sound with sound right to the other side of the tape recorder. So I had a little bit of a knowledge of it, but really when we got into the studio and I saw that 4-track reel-to-reel tape recorder,
whoa,
and the little
tracks.
console, right? But it looked like a big console to me. I was hooked, So then it became guitar and recording, my two, and I love them both, and I still do. But I did. I mean, I've played all over. Played Madison Square Garden. When we got signed to A&M Records, we can talk about that a little bit if you want.
Absolutely. But, and you've had music in films, and you performed in some of the great venues. So, as culminating, your love of performance, it's amazing. Because I tell my students at the Seton Hall, I say, when I work with musicians and people who want to have careers in music, and we talk about music is not a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. You never know. Give yourself as broad a skill set as possible, and we'll see where it goes with the career.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I sort of have, I teach in music, music technology at Drexel, and I sort of have similar conversations that I'm sure you have. But for me, I had at a certain point, the touring lifestyle is rough. It's not for everybody. And you see a lot of people, it's great when you're 19 and 20, but as you get older and, you want to start a family and those kind of things, touring can be a little rough. So, but I performed up until, let's see, I'm 61 now. So I performed up until I was about 40 years old, maybe a little bit later than that, 42, 43. But I basically now have moved behind the scenes, and spend most of my time in the recording studio or behind a console doing live sound somewhere. But I mean, all of the time we spent performing, it was a lot of it. There's highs and lows.
That's always the way.
Say.
That's like I said, the same. In my career as a conductor, I've been the star. I've watched one of my businesses go bankrupt, my opera company. I mean, there's just always these ebbs and flows, and the economy has been so hard for musicians the last couple of years. And I think it's always been that way. When I read about the great composers, a lot of them had serious financial problems, from Mozart to Beethoven. And you look at these guys who are the best of my business, and you're like, wow, it's never been that easy.
You're 100% correct. And the other thing for me was that I look back on certain gigs, for instance, that I cherish those experiences. Like one of them is Madison Square Garden, because we were opening for Emerson, Lake and Powell. Everybody knows Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Well, they came back and had a sort of a comeback album in the mid 80s, I believe. And this was when we had our record deal with A&M Records. And we were on a tour with them. We were their opening act for ELP. It was Emerson, Lake and Powell. And they had a hit record at the time. But so we played Madison Square Garden, and we're on stage, and all the power goes out.
Oh, no.
It's pitch black on stage and nothing. And everybody in the audience, I think we were expecting Yngwie Malmsteen, because we were added to the bill late. So here's my band, which were really more of, we had Beatlesque influences, Prince. We were very influenced by, our producer was too, Gary King, who produced all of our demos. Great producer, great experience working with him. He had those influences and brought them to our music. And this crowd at the Madison Square Garden was expecting Yngwie Malmsteen. But we did have a lot of percussion on stage. That's one thing that my band, we were called Bricklin, my brother and I, our last name. And we had a timbale rig. Our keyboard player had a percussion rig. So we just went into percussion solo. And we had the whole place, at least my memory is like this. I wish I had a recording of it, because I don't know. But my memory is we started this thing and the place started rocking. They were really into it. And finally,
nothing like a lot of drums to get people moving, right?
Yeah, we weren't even mic'd up, though, because
wow.
there was no power. Everything went out. And what do? We could have walked off stage, and I don't know who it was, my brother probably, just was like, percussion jam, We went into percussion, and all the power came back on. The PA came back on. But it was endearing to the audience. And we also had a cover of I Am the Walrus, which is an interesting cover song to do. It's a Beatles song, a John Lennon song primarily. And I'm sure you know the song, I Am the Walrus.
Love the song, yeah. I love the ball.
Yeah,
I love
so we had a cover of it, and we had this was mid-'80s, so samplers were kind of new. And we had a keyboard where we had a really authentic cello patch. Grainy, really in your face, kind of just how those strings
gritty
sound.
Yeah.
And my brother played it. And so, we were 6-piece. We had 2 guitars, bass, drums, keyboard player. My brother played keys. Sometimes he played guitar, sometimes percussion. It was, we had a lot of stuff going on. And we had played that song on the beach in Asbury Park for WNEW, which is a radio station in New York. And so we played this thing, and they recorded it. It was live on the radio. It was one of those Westwood One, I think, broadcasts. And so they recorded it, and then NEW started playing it. So we sort of were known for that song too. So we did this percussion jam, and we ended with I Am the Walrus, and we went over good. It's a great memory.
So what was it like, walking on stage? I've never talked to anyone who's been on Madison Square Garden as a rock artist. That must have been that doesn't get any better than that.
I'll say this. First of all, you have 30 minutes, and then plus our downtime from that power outage, which was probably 5 minutes or maybe 10. I'm not exactly sure how long.
Probably felt like 3 hours, right?
Yeah, it was strange. But you know, you're so, at least we had such a complex rig, because I'm going to go a little technical on you. And I'm sure there's people listening, or you probably use some of these things. Sequencers back in the day, sequencing was done like on a little Commodore computer in the mid 80s, right? Or they had Roland had MSQ 700s, and we had a Lindrum too. We had percussion programmed into, was a drum machine called a Lindrum that our drummer would play along to. They were, addition. They were
Sure.
And my job was to make all that work, and I was doing like cassette data dumps during the show. So I was stressed out all the time. Is this data going to get into this? Now everybody that's on a computer, they just press the program, boom, it's there. I'm hitting play on this cassette deck that has this little cord plugged into the Lindrum, changing data. So I was in my own world. I was so obsessed with, okay, I got to do this now. Oh, I got to, and I had some keyboards that I had to manipulate. So I guess my experience was more, outside of body, like just focused on these things. So after it was over, seems like a whirlwind to me, But I will say, when you walk out and you see a big crowd of people, it's certainly it's uplifting, to say the least.
Yeah, that must have been so much fun. And do you get to know the band on these tours? These when you open on these?
A little bit, yeah. Cozy Powell was pretty accessible. Keith Emerson, yeah, we hung around with them a bit. Not too much. You really hang out with bands more if you're like in a recordings. Well, they had no idea who we were, and Yngwie Malmsteen was supposed to be on this tour initially. So
yeah, the audience was deprived of a lot of fast arpeggios that night.
Yes. Yeah. Oh man, I'll tell you, when we played Glen Fall, like we went from Madison Square Garden, I think, up north to somewhere in New York, but it was high, and it was in, they call them hockey sheds. I don't, the local venue, maybe hold 15,000 people. They fully expected Yngwie Malmsteen.
Oh no!
I can tell you that right now. It took a while. We won them over, I think, but it was a little tough.
You had to work hard on that one.
Yeah, we had to work pretty hard on that one.
I always like that. He's got a couple of good songs. It's so hard for a virtuoso like that to write good songs. They may show off their technique and it may be incredibly great, but for actually to turn that into like writing a really good songwriter is very difficult. Like that's one of the things that makes Van Halen so special to me, is that there was virtuosity, but there's also the ability to collaborate and really write great tunes that stand the test of time.
Agreed, 100%. Yeah, Eddie was special. I mean, he special player. His son is an amazing musician too, Wolfgang. I just listened to his album, and I was impressed. What a great voice too. But
it's gotta be tough to grow in the shadow of like your dad is one of the great guitar players of all time and songwriters of all time.
I was thinking that, and I follow him on Twitter, and I see sort of the what he goes through with that particular thing. People will say things along those lines, and it must be tough. I agree. But to the point, I mean, you're right. Musicians like Eddie Van Halen, for me, were, I guess, pivotal in like when you look at certain things, the evolution of guitar. You had Hendrix, who was doing that. You can find really amazing, players, but certain players had impact on other people to play, and Eddie was very much that person. People saw him play. It was a whole new style of guitar. Interestingly, do you know who's had, I'll say this because I have to teach some of these items, do you know who's had a significant impact on the acoustic guitar, specifically with girls? And I'm talking about sales of instruments. Taylor Swift.
That's not surprising. Yeah, she's very guitar focused and.
But there was a few articles of her impact on the industry of guitar sales. She had a what do you call that? I'll think of the word, not countable, but measurable influence on the sales of acoustic guitars to females. And I thought that's very interesting. Eddie Van Halen and Taylor Swift, you wouldn't put them in the same conversation, but they both had, Eddie. Or another great story is when Satisfaction came out and the little fuzz box that Keith Richard used, they completely sold out that year. You couldn't find one. And because people are like, that's new, I want to do that. And that's one of the great things about discovering new things. I know we kind of shifted topics, but that's, for me, that's really exciting when you hear something new and, it has this impact, like, oh, that's incredible. And it sort of
you love a
influences the
field.
generation.
You love a field when you still get excited. When I hear a great, like I'm an opera conductor and a conductor, I hear a great soloist, a great virtuoso, I get just as excited as when I perform. It's so exciting to watch the new talent come up, to watch where it goes. And for you, it must be the same when you see the talent, also when you see new technology and how that technology integrates and how it can make our lives different.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that, there was a time when I thought, like, oh, I want to do it all. I want to learn everything. I want to do it all. And, it's one of those things where you sort of realize that you maybe not be able to become an expert at everything. And how this relates to that particular topic is what I'm going to get at. But I love listening to mixes and how engineers balance things. And I'll tell you, Phineas, who produces Billie Eilish, a master at low-end production. The low end on those records. Now, granted, I don't know who else is working, whatever, but I believe he is a bona fide genius when it comes to that style of production. That's all new to me. Like, low end in general now in music is completely different than from the 80s and into the 90s. And when I'm talking about low end, I'm talking about bass synthesizers, bass guitar, even just the way the low end in recordings is being used. That just blows my mind today. If you put on a record from the 90s, there may be, the bass drum has some low end and whatnot, but then you put on some of this music today, the production is oriented down here. And I just think it's incredible. That's, so I agree. Can there be, did the Beatles made amazing music, right? So did all these other amazing artists through time, have making this music. Now we have this, technology has created this reproduction of sound that we can all hear down, this low end frequency, and people are utilizing that in new and incredible ways. So I know that may sound nerdish, but like, that stuff's exciting to me.
Hey, listen, you're talking one of the biggest nerds there is. I love anything with the orchestra or opera or anything, and even rock. I just love music. There's only two types of music: good music and bad music. I just love music, regardless of genre, artists.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you this question, since I can, because we're right here.
Bring it.
How about the way the Beatles utilize, George Martin in particular? We talk about I Am the Walrus, the way the strings were recorded. I don't really recall that in your face, dry orchestra. We're talking about what, the London Philharmonic or those musicians. And it's just, those kind of things, the way they achieve that, because a lot of orchestras are mic'd from far away, and you hear everything nice and balanced, and it's beautiful, but they used it in a real aggressive way. And
that's the genius, is they had the right people advising them and working with them and editing them. And it just, but people don't realize all those other members of the band who are making those things happen, like yourself, people who edit, mix, there's what makes a great product is all those people working together.
Yeah, the team. And the other thing too is, and I want to talk about this a little bit, is the recording studio as an instrument,
Hmm.
which is very, in my world, and I'll give you an example how this works for me. So I'm working on this album right now. I was telling you a little bit about it. I'm working with this band, Neil McGettigan and the 11th Hour, and we're in the middle of the record, and it has a real sort of vintage feel to the album. And when I say vintage, I'm talking. It has like Nick Lowe influence, a little Tom
Hmm.
Petty, a little Huey Lewis in the News. From that sort of you know uh, genre or time era of music. And one of the things we did was one of the guitar players in the band recorded some of his parts on his studio, his home studio, and then sent me files. Well, I don't just import files to use them. I listen to them. It becomes a paintbrush to me. Ah, this part he did in the verse. This would be great under the solo. If I turn these two things around, I have a new chord that I can, change. So I, that kind of stuff is really exciting to me. Using the studio as an instrument. Oh, I can take this sound, I'll run it into a reverb and just have the delay come through with maybe and pitch shift it up. Oh, I got a new sound. It's new atmosphere. That stuff's really exciting. And I
And so
continue
much experimentation happens in the studio. I talk about this with the indie bands we have on the show a lot. That I love to explore how a song that's written at home and then maybe they take it out and they perform it on the road and they bring it in the studio with an engineer and with a producer, and it changes so much in that process.
It absolutely does. And I will tell you, I have learned. I'm going to give you the secret to success if you're going to be an
Well, write
engineer
this
or
down,
work
everyone at home. Write this
in
down.
production. Okay, I'm going to give it to you right now. Be fun to be around.
I tell my son that. I tell my students that my first chapter is be nice and be good and prepared.
Be good, prepare. All those things being equal, if you put 5 people in a room, 5 producers are all probably going to have some good skills. All things being equal, you're the one that's the funnest to be around. You will get the gig. Fact.
And
Um,
according to one of our guests, Laura Hall, it says that we're not nerds. We're just jazzed up. I like that. Thank you, Laura.
oh, I love that too. I'm always jazzed up.
Me,
I live with
I
that.
met you. I dropped off my son, and our kids were going on tour together for Paul Green Rock. We were playing with John Anderson, which was awesome. And we just sat down for the first time, and I'm like, this guy is so interesting. And you just love your work, and I can just tell that by
Thank
just
you.
talking to you for a couple hours. And I just said this is someone I want to talk to because you have such an incredible background in music as a performer, and now as an audio engineer, and everything in between. You're still actively writing music and collaborating with really great artists.
Well, thank you. I am working with John too right now, John Anderson, and my kids. It's pretty amazing. My kids went on the same tour as Mason, your son, and I
I
have to
believe that
tell.
your kids gave Mason a mohawk on the
I
road too.
was going to say, so you drop your son off, and the next day, my son comes to me and says, "I'm going to give him a mohawk." And I looked at him, Mason, and I said, "Are you sure you want that?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah." But they did a pretty good job.
Now, he look, I saw it. I saw it on a jumbotron on one of those one of those
Yeah,
shows that had nice. And I'm like, that looks pretty cool. He's got the white tux, the black shirt, and the
yeah,
mohawk.
he looked great. He
He had a
looked
great
great.
time. He was so impressed. Like your kids are just so talented, and like
Well,
it's a
thank
very
you.
musical family. I'm like, no wonder. Like I love I love when you put young people together with talent. They just they all spark each other and they all learn from each other.
They do, and I'll say this because I know you've had Paul Green as a guest. I believe you have,
He
correct?
was very early on in the process. And it was a lot of fun. Paul's doing such a great job putting those programs together. And really, he's a great. I call him the maestro of rock. He's a great teacher for these kids.
Let me say, there is nobody like Paul Green. If you want to learn what it's like to be in a touring band and go out and play and have that kind of excitement, pressure, boredom, long traveling in a bus, going back to excitement, there's lots of excitement. there's no other program that you can do, at least to my knowledge, that's like
I
that, the
mean,
Paul Green Rock
here
Academy.
you are as a professional musician yourself and a professional rock and a contemporary musician. You know that you've been on the stages, and me as a classical guy, and I'm like, what I see the success in what Paul does, because I've gotten to, I wasn't performing when Mason joined usually I'm traveling and doing a lot of shows, but I wasn't that year. So Mason signed up, and he would go to these rehearsals, and I'd watch how Paul works with the students. I wanted to hear music. I just missed live music making, so I was watching. He treats them like a lot like this, like the same, like the talented classical students are taught. Like there's no, you have to be prepared. You have to be a good colleague. You have to be 100% ready and focused on those rehearsals, and those skills are the same if you want to be successful in anything else.
I agree. And one other thing that I know drives certain parents crazy, but I applaud Paul for this. If and me as a sound person and an engineer, this can drive me crazy too. But the onus for the band to sound good is on the kids. If they don't sound good, if they're not balancing their amps, it's just going to sound like crap. And
shit in, and shit out, right? It's going to be.
He's like, to him, it's like, fix it. You plug the mic in, you get it to sound good.
He has the kids doing their own sound rehearsal, making sure they're equalized. I think it's great.
Yeah, and it makes them self-reliant or self-sustainable, with those skill sets, and he sort of has it down to. It's really great when you see it all work. When the kids run on stage and there's 25 of them and 10 of them are running on and then 10 of them are running off, and they have all the the logistics together. It's pretty impressive, I have to say.
Well, watching those young people play with one of my legend, John Anderson of Yes, and watching them do a show where they just absolutely crushed it. I saw Tour 1 and Tour 2, and I was like, man, there's such great talent there.
Yeah, and one thing about John Anderson, he truly cares about it. It seems to me, all my interaction, he almost is a teacher himself. In fact, I consider him like an instructor. When they rehearse together, he has very firm expectations, and he's very intuitive about, what needs to happen and how he wants to present his show and how he wants to integrate with the kids and as musicians and as performers, even down to what they're going to wear, and that whole element of it. And it's all important. We forget show business. It's show business. Music is music, but there's also a show element to it. And, and I think, you get that full experience, and, John has his eye on all those details. So
who better than an artist who's been at that level of rock and roll to teach young people? I mean, and it's amazing that he does, and he takes that. I'm just so impressed because there's nothing like being around people like that who are legends in the field, honestly.
Yeah, and one other thing he does is for the students who are in Paul's the Rock Academy, is you can send him music and he'll write something to it. I mean, he really gives his time, and it's a great experience, and we're humbled to have a deity, really, in our lives, and in the whole scene that they had so much fun. I believe they're going out again in April and maybe again in the summer, which is pretty impressive. Yeah, I'm sure Mason will be out, right?
He's asking me, I'd like to go. I don't care if I miss school. I'm like, well, we're going to talk about that because, yeah, it's as a father, I got to make sure he graduates high school.
Well, there's summer too.
We're going to make sure it works out because he loved being on the road, and what are you going to do? So in all your experience working with, you're still doing a lot of singer-songwriter credits, right? You're still working with artists and collaborating? Yes.
A few records that I did that I'm really proud of. Some of the people listening might know. A guy named Matt McAndrew, who came in second on The Voice. And I had worked with him and the brilliant musician Kevin Hansen, who produced the album. I added additional production, and I engineered all of the rhythm tracks. Rhythm tracks are the initial tracks, drums, however the group performs first. and then they finished the record, and then I got it back to mix, and I mixed that album, and it's a really great sounding record, and Matt is extraordinarily talented. But that record, this is interesting. So he was on the show, and it was interesting too because he had just finished this album. It's called View of the Pines, or I think View from the Pines or View of the Pines, somewhere in there. And the guy's name is Matt McAndrew. Anyway, he it started to take off because of his performance on the show. And my experience is generally they don't promote things that the people on the show have done prior because they're looking really moving forward. But the record entered the charts high, and I think it, as an album, it made it up to the top 50 albums, all genre. So it was fun to do that. That particular album, he's now the singer for a band that's popular, and I forget their name, but I know they tour internationally now. But anyway, so I feel like I'm a good fit for singer-songwriters, because I really enjoy live recording. That's one of my fortes, live drums, live musicians playing together, and a lot of times, the singer-songwriters that I work with are from that Jackson Browne, moving forward, of course I'm drawing a blank, but the singer-songwriter sound that revolves around not drum machines and like a single bass note. I'm talking about, fully fleshed out recordings with multiple guitars, maybe Hammond organ and other elements. So I would say I really enjoy that, recording that kind of music. So I do, luckily I've had a handful of artists that I've worked with recently. But I will say I just produced this band called Albright from St. Joe's in Philadelphia. Their debut album is called Positive Sedative. They're like punk Foo Fighters. That's really cool. It's heavy and riff, the guitar riffs are intense, but it's sort of a punk kind of attitude. So if anybody wants to check that out, Albright, ALBRIGHT, on Spotify. Positive Sedative is the album. But for me, I like recording, not just singer-songwriters, but live. That's my, we can add electronic elements. I have a keyboard here. I have every drum machine sample in the world, and certainly can do that. But my druthers, that's a word, right? Druthers is, live drums, live people performing together. That's sort of where I want to hang my hat,
Very good. You've also worked in a lot of different genres, right? I mean, I see you have a songwriting credit with a Rihanna song.
Oh yeah, it was for her, and I'm not. It was with what's the guy's name? He's a really, really successful. Oh, Knowles. He's in London. When I was working with him, I was in Ardmore, Pennsylvania, and he was in London. And we were, I guess, FaceTiming and just sending files back and forth. And it was a song that he had written for Rihanna. But he's written like 10 number one hits. Belinda Carlisle. Do you know the song?
Rick Knowles is the name, right?
Yeah, Rick Knowles. That's it. Rick Knowles. I mean, You Get What You Give, which was a huge hit. He wrote that song, I believe. Belinda Carlisle, a bunch of her big hits. He, either co-wrote or wrote and produced. So I got to work with him. And that's another thing. I was recommended to him by my good friend, Robert Smith, who's a really great engineer who works out in New York, based in New York. And so yeah, that was a lot of fun. I don't know if she ever covered the song. I didn't really. I just recorded the vocals and did a mix and sent it. But yeah, it was a lot of fun working that way because, now with being able to upload files back and forth, once I finished one take, I could just send it to them, and they had it in a second. I just on his FTP site, and he'd have the thing, and he'd say, "Oh, I want her to work on this line a little more," and then like they were writing. So this was a writing session taking place in London and Ardmore. He'd say, I don't like the third line. So she'd go in, like, write down a different line, and then she'd sing that. We'd send it. Like, oh, yeah, okay, that's good. It was a really fun experience.
Can you imagine back in the 70s and 80s that this was even possible to write this way and to collaborate across the world this quickly?
I know. It's technology is incredible. I'll tell you an album I'm working on right now, this amazing guitar player. His name is Vahe Sarkisian, and he's Armenian, and he has taken classic Armenian songs, and he's an incredible guitar player in the Eddie Van Halen, shred, or however you want to call that. He has taken these fast melodies and arranged them, but he has like jazz drums, upright bass, and this shred guitar. But we've also have oud, and we have, all kinds of crazy, cool percussion. That was the first time I ever recorded goat toes, which was have you seen a goat toe shaker?
No.
Okay, well, they're goat toenails, and it's like an Egyptian or Middle Eastern type shaker, and it has goat toes, and I got to record it.
Cool.
Yeah, that's what I said. But
don't say that, or my son's going to want one. He'll be like ordering one on, have it be delivered in a couple days.
He was like, oh, yeah, we got to record the goat toes. I was like, what? Oh, yeah,
What?
It's a shaker. And he showed it to me. Sure, it's goat toenails. But it sounded awesome. And so that's a really cool, fun, interesting, different record. And we're in the middle of that. I'm really excited for that to get finished because great musicianship. And I have my memory is not so great as I get older, but I know he has a couple guests on the record that are very successful, jazz musicians. And that have played with some really big artists, or they are themselves. So it's just great musicianship. For me, I can find brilliance in many different things. It's out there to be seen. It's out there to be heard. And you just have to keep your ears open. And a part of a producer role is to be able to pick up on, oh, that's special. Maybe they don't know it, but that's special. Maybe we're going to zero in on that. And that's sort of another thing that I sort of try to pride myself in, at least to my mind, is like finding those little Easter eggs within what people do and really trying to bring that out. And in a way, it's always them. I play guitar. And when I was young, and I started working with artists, I'd be, oh, no, play it like this. Oh, yeah, just give me the guitar. I'll show you. That was stupid. Really, what my role is to inspire. So what I should do, and what I do now, is play it, but I play it. I might show something, but I'll play it with no dexterity and mess up constantly. And I'm giving that away, but it's partly because I'm old now, but it's also partly because I don't want to give a finished idea. I just want to show a little bit of what you might be able to, pick up on and try to inspire you to be your best.
Well, people, that mentorship model and your years in the field, I mean, young artists they're always evolving, right? We're always learning from the people who are older than us. I still seek out, when I was young, I sought out the older conductors. I was always an assistant conductor for the 70-year-old conductors, and I learned everything I could because no one knows everything. We're always expanding our sphere of influence. And unless you were there, you're not going to know some of this stuff. You're not going to kind of have an idea. And that's what, that makes you a very valuable kind of person to do these type of jobs.
Well, yeah, hopefully. And the other thing is just, I feel best when people feel good about what they did, what of themselves. I feel like I was successful is if somebody leaves the session really pumped about what they did. That to me is amazing. And I did learn. I will say you and I have a sort of a similar background, slightly different in that I got to work with these Grammy-winning producers as an artist. I wasn't there as an assistant engineer. I was there as the artist, but I was so interested. I was like a sponge. I got to work with, a guy named Neil Dorfman, he's won a Grammy for Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms. Wow. That album, which is an incredible
one
album.
of the legendary rock albums. That's
so we worked with Neil right after he had won the Grammy for that album. He won Best Engineered Recording. I got to sit in the studio with him for 6 months. And that there wasn't really the university setting in 83 or 4, whenever that was, that we have now. We have these great music programs and great technology programs, but we didn't, at least to my knowledge, that wasn't really there. And of course, I was a signed musician. I wasn't going to go to, this is what I was doing. But then I realized this is my education. So I really better pay attention. I was really into it. And then, as an artist, I got to work with Kevin Killen, who he mixed and recorded much of Peter Gabriel's So, which is another classic album. And my brother as well, we became really good friends with Kevin. Kevin, he is one of the most amazing engineers I've ever worked with, and producers. Partly because, again, it's just he's fun to be around. It's his personality. But then you throw in this wealth of knowledge, and watching him mix. He mixed an album for us, and I just remember being, just jaw dropped at his acumen, if you know what I mean. Just his ears, just how he could balance everything, and and then of course I'm okay. What did you do? What's that plugged into? Oh yeah, all right, okay. What did you do there? Wait, could you tell me that again? So
we are a lot alike, because I was like that in my field with the conducting. When you were with a 70-year-old conductor who's conducted all the greatest singers in the world, I'm like, so I was like a sponge. You take me out to dinner, we would talk about this Italianate sound versus the American sound versus all of the nuances of conducting, and it's just it's exciting to learn from the best, and then it's exciting to bring that knowledge to the next generation too.
I totally agree, and I love sharing, because I have these funny stories that you have to be sort of like in the room with people for stuff to happen.
Okay, give us a few.
Well, I just remember one time, this is one of Neil Dorsman's story, when he had the assistant try to play tambourine on a track that we were cutting, and the guy really, he had no idea. And by the way, tambourine is a much harder instrument to play
Absolutely.
than you might think. I'm just going to clue everybody in, if you don't already know that. It's not the easiest instrument to play, especially if you have a bar 7 here and there. So anyway, this assistant goes up and he's all excited, like he thinks Neil has all this confidence, and when he goes out and he's getting ready to play. So Neil had set it up so he was kind of, I guess, he couldn't really see us, I don't think. But he starts playing, and I think he looks into the studio. We were all on the floor laughing. We were just laughing through the entire song. And then Neil just let him play the whole time. And it was done. He's like, how did I do? And, it was just stupid stuff like that. Or, we were in Holland. Another great story. We were in the studio next to Iron Maiden, if you can believe this. So we were in Holland for a few months. No, excuse me, a few weeks, not a few months. Might have felt like a few months, but we were there working at this beautiful studio called Whistle Lord. It's gorgeous, and I believe it or not, this theme from Cheers was recorded there. I could be wrong, but it was right outside of Amsterdam, in a little town called Hilversum. And my brother and I were there for 3 weeks, and we were mixing a record, and Neil Dorsman was mixing it. This was the A&M Bricklin album, and we mixed it in Holland, believe it or not. I just remember with playing Iron Maiden and foosball, and they were so good. My brother and I would be together. I'd get the front or the back. I forget which one of us took the front and the back, and any one of them could kick our butt because they could pass the ball. They weren't, and it was just the skill level. And we would have dinner every day in this little canteen. And one day, the studio would serve it to you like they were the restaurant. So they had this canteen, and they had this huge notebook filled with menus. You'd order from the menu. Somebody at the studio would order it for you. It would all come to them, and then they would serve it on serve it to you like in a beautiful room, like a canteen, they called it. And one time the assistant that was working with us thought their food was our food. And he went over and started eating it, and a war erupted. Iron Maiden got mad at our assistant. It was just funny. But stories like that.
I
There's
tell
some
you,
I really can't, say on here.
we'll talk about them offline another time.
Yeah,
We'll
we'll
get to the
talk about
beer.
them offline.
And you also do a lot of things like game day audio. What's it like? You're like Philadelphia's like game day guy. Tell us some of the place
Well,
you're doing live
I'm
audio.
one of there's two or three of us. I work for the Philadelphia Eagles, the Philadelphia Phillies, the Philadelphia Union, Villanova University, and Temple University. And I know that sounds like a lot, but I'm a game day audio engineer. So I sit in front of a digital console and mix the sound that you hear in the stadium. We call it the bowl. And I did get into broadcast television audio. That's a whole other story. I did that for a little bit. I was just trying things out. It was after the band, of course, we were successful for a while then. So I was thinking about things to do. I tried a little bit of broadcast television. And so I had some basic knowledge, and then I was able to get my foot in the door into this, what you call it, the, broadcasting, for the stadiums. So I call it I love it. I'm a sports fan. I love, I've been a Philadelphia, sorry, anybody who hates the Eagles. I've been a Philadelphia Eagles fan and Phillies fan all my life. So that's fun. And I call it my amazing side hustle. It's the best part-time job I ever had. So
Listen, your years in the music business so translate very easily in the other way. It's amazing where we go and how kind of the career kind of expands, and you can do something you never thought you could before.
To that point, I'll just quickly tell you one of the things I never expected to do ever was I've given reports in copyright infringement cases, and I've worked on some high profile cases. I worked on the Led Zeppelin Stairway to Heaven case.
That was all over the news. Wow, tell us about that one.
I can only talk about some of it. I actually participated in Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, and John Paul Jones's deposition. So I was privy to all three of those depositions in London. I was hired for that as the audio engineer for the deposition, because there was so much audio material that they had to, that the I guess plaintiff was utilizing. So they, just like they would have a stenographer. Everybody knows what a deposition is. It's when you have to, you're deposed. You are interviewed by one attorney, and then your attorney is there, or the attorneys for the defendant. It's a whole thing. So that's one thing. And that was really interesting, and I had to sign a protective order, and I'm not allowed to talk about it. I don't
want to get you in trouble, but what a fascinating thing to be a part of. That's like music history right there.
Here's something that will kind of is incredible. I sat next to Jimmy Page while he played Stairway to Heaven with the guitar he recorded it with. It's a Harmony Sovereign. I have a picture of it. I'll send it to you. And it's so
your teenage self must have almost wanted to,
It's the only thing my kids think I ever did, was I got to sit next to Jimmy Page. I did nothing except sit next to Jimmy Page. So that was really sort of, and I got to watch how he fingerpicked it, and I didn't realize he uses this finger too, which I guess all really accomplished guitar players should do when they're fingerpicking. But anyway, that was really an incredible experience. And then I actually did provide a report for the other side, the plaintiff side for Spirit, and was in Los Angeles for the whole trial, which was not fun, contentious, and I've provided other reports, and I sort of I know we've been talking for a while, but I will say this is one I'm very proud of. So Usher covered a song called Bad Girl, which became a huge hit. The album sold 22 million copies, and that was a big song on the album. It generated millions and millions of dollars. So that particular song was originally entitled Club Girl, and was written mostly by a young guy from Philadelphia named Dan Marino. And Dan had some partners that he worked with that basically, in a nutshell, stole the song from him and told him that that he was going to be credited as a writer. They got a deal. The three of them were, they even went to the Grammys. The thing, I believe the album won a Grammy, and
Holy
they went to the
smokes.
Grammys, and he's sitting there feeling like he has made it. He's 21 years old. And then the record, when it came out before the Grammys, when it came out, he was listed as additional guitar, and that was it. And they
Oof.
all told him, "Oh, it's just a credit. It's just a mistake. We're going to get that fixed." Anyway, a year or so later, he went to the studio that they shared. The three of them had a studio and an office, and he found canceled checks. Everybody, they skipped town. He found canceled checks. Anyway, it went to trial, and eventually, and he was awarded $44.1 million.
Oh,
and he
my
deserved
God.
it.
Good
And
for him.
I testified in that trial. Now, how much I'll get, I don't know. But I testified in that trial, and I never in a million years thought that I would do that. That was a complete U-turn from anything that was in my mind that I would ever do.
And still working hard and still doing lots of projects. What are some things you're working on right now?
Well, I'm finishing, I think I mentioned some of them. I'm finishing an album with Neil McGettigan in the 11th
Right.
Hour. I'm finishing a record with Vahe Sarkisian, which is the Armenian. I say that because these are traditional Armenian, I don't want to say folk songs, but traditional material that has been arranged. And I'm really excited about that because it's different, very, very different. Also, working with John Anderson and my kids on some original music, which is a lot of fun.
That's got to be a wild experience, bringing your kids with a rock legend and putting that all together. That must be amazing.
It's great. Oh, and I'm doing this other project right now too. It's a whole concept album on the Civil War, and the songwriter, this writer named Tommy Dolan from New Jersey. He's an incredible songwriter, and he does something very interesting. We have singers from all over the world. Now you can just hire a singer on SoundBetter or Fiverr. So we put these tracks together, and then we pick a singer and we send them the thing. So we get, if we wanted certain accents or certain sounds to the vocal, that's how we're choosing them. And it's a really beautiful album, and I'm really proud to be part of it. And I continue to do.
It's almost like speed dating, right?
Yeah, in a way. The good ones, the ones that are successful. I don't want to say the good ones, but the ones that work out for us are we certainly use again. And then I also do a sound design and mixing for the sports teams, videos. So video you'll see in a stadium, I'll get a video and an unmixed tracks of audio with sound effects, music, dialogue. It's really a television style of mixing thing. So, just very busy. It's good.
Now, I know you're teaching, you're bringing your wealth of knowledge to young people, and you're constantly out there still working. What advice do you have for people coming up in the business today?
Wow. Can I get back to? No, I'm going to try to think. Honestly, I think the biggest advice that I can give you is you have to be bulletproof in what you do. So if you're going to be, and I'm going to elaborate on that too. It's generally better to excel at one thing. If you're, we're talking in the tech side of the world here, to excel at one thing and put blinders on and go for it hard. Rather than, I have to say, I've had a very varied career. I even was the director of a music conference here in Philly called the Philadelphia Music Conference. We had 3,000 daytime attendees and 25,000 nighttime attendees. And I was the director of the conference because I'm interested in administrative kind of things too. But to my detriment in some ways, because I was like, oh, I like to do this. Oh, I like to do this. But if somebody is really just, right now, if you're young in your career, I would say find the thing that you're passionate about. The old phrase, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. That's true. And I feel lucky that I've gotten to work in things that have interested me. But I will say financially, probably if I just said, okay, I'm going to mix records, move to LA, before I had a family and just concentrate on that, you might hit the jackpot. You might rise above modest or moderate success and get to that next level. So that's one piece of advice. The other thing is, within all of that, be fun to be around. Telling you, that's the ticket. It's in everything. You're a great musician, you're going to be in a band. Well, if you're not fun to be around, who's going to want to hang around with you?
Yeah, you see that all the time. It's like, boy, when times get hard, and they always do in music, having someone who's fun to be around,
always do.
A chill attitude is very important when you're on the road or when you're in a tough situation.
Yeah. And I'll say one other thing too. I really, my heart is, it bleeds and is also full for songwriters in general, especially today we didn't really talk about it much, but the way that they're compensated, songwriters in particular now with streaming, which is really not together yet. And, people who, there are songwriters who used to be able to afford a modest house and now they can't. And, I really feel for them, but they're going to make art no matter what. That's the thing. They don't have a choice. That art is coming, whether they get paid for it or not. And that's sort of amazing and cruel all in the same time, because, of course they'd love to make a beautiful piece of art. Music, I'm talking about. Art is with quotes, can be anything. And maybe they'd love to be adored and sell it and, make money. But in music right now, it's really hard. So, I feel for them.
It's crazy the way that they compensate on like the streaming services. I had an artist with like 1 million views, and they told me they were getting paid so little. I was just shocked. I mean, that's 1 million downloads is a ton for like an indie singer songwriter.
Yeah, I think it was Peter Frampton who went in front of Congress and said to them, I believe he posed the question, how much money do I think I made for 55 million streams of Baby I Love Your Way?
I have no idea.
I think it was like $1,700.
That's insanity.
55 million. If it was 20 years ago, he would have 5 houses.
Yeah, he'd be all over the world.
Yeah, exactly.
There was an Onion article. It's like I forget what it was. Something like Spotify gives out its first $100 check to artists.
I shouldn't laugh. I shouldn't laugh at that.
It's cruel.
But you know what? I wish technology, or Spotify in particular, I don't want to make any enemies, but I really wish they'd share some of the wealth, because their whole business model relies on creators. And, the record companies are getting paid now. I'd love to see the songwriters and the artists be able to make a living again. I really feel for them.
We have a lot of them on the show, and they're the youngs who are really doing some really great work. I scour like Reverb Nation, and they send me like 5,000 artists at a time, and I go through them. I find the ones that grab me. And some of them are doing a lot of performing, and they're really starting to build a nice. But they all say that it's so hard to, they have to be out there, and they're going to be out there touring anyway. But during COVID, there was no touring basically, so it's. Recordings, and luckily they have ways to make money on, like, people can support them like directly, but it's really a challenge.
Well, and to your point, and I will say this, I mean, the model now is make it on your own. You go out, you gig, you sell your merchandise, you sell your music however you can, you play the shows, you build a fan base and a following, and I mean, that hasn't really changed, although what's changed now is recorded music is monetized differently. And the other thing that's changed is that record labels now, it's rare, at least in my experience or my awareness, that they'll take a shot on somebody that has X number of followers and whatnot. Before, they might take a shot on artistry, is what I'm trying to say. And that seems to be less today. It's like, doesn't matter what you do. You have 25,000 followers. Okay, good. Now, okay, it's a safe bet. Whereas before,
that's becomes the way that it's build your market first. They know they can. It's the same with television too. They're starting to hire actors and comedians who have the huge following first. They're seeing what's out there. It's a huge paradigm shift in the industry.
Well, yeah, and one of the other things I'll say too is that it used to be, the idea was 3 albums. The first album was to introduce the artist. The second album and third album were then to build the artist's career, all with tour support. So that was sort of the model, like in the 70s, maybe before, but specifically that was the model moving into the 80s was 3 albums. That was it. Okay. And after 3 albums, if you don't hit, like Bruce Springsteen, he didn't hit until his 3rd album. And in fact, he was worried about getting dropped, which is like, Bruce
Can you imagine?
Yeah. So, but the point is, that was the model, but that's sort of gone away. I believe it has gone away. And now it's do it on your own. And then
and think about this. What is an album these days? Everything's EPs, like it's short releases. It's like singles because everything has to drop on Spotify and the streaming platforms or YouTube. And it's the idea of an album gets kind of I ask my students, like my college kids, do you guys listen to albums? Like what album? Like it's just shorts, EPs. It's like a single here, a single there.
We can have a whole other conversation on this.
We will. You can definitely come back on the show. We can talk all night.
Yeah, because that's a big sore spot for me. Do you remember, like you'd wait and your favorite artist was releasing
Dark
a
Side
record.
of the Moon.
You would buy it unheard, and then you'd get the album. And you read all the credits. Credits is another thing I'm mad about.
Me
Where
too.
Are credits.
I'm always like, who's the engineer? Who's the third? Like, who's that trumpet player on that recording? Like, I want to know this stuff.
And on the records, and when compact disc came out, the information was still there. You could still find it. Maybe you needed glasses to read it, but it was still there. But nowadays, and Spotify doesn't credit. At least I can see they credit the producer, but you don't see beyond that really. You don't see who engineered it. You don't see the extra musicians, and even, getting a production credit can be tough. So that's one of the things I'm working on now is to, try to ensure that the stuff you worked on, you have a credit for, because, people like me who need to work, that's how, it's, word of mouth. People hear something you did, and credits are integral to that, an integral part. And, I do hope that it, I'm sure in 10 years, this will be an entirely different conversation. Well,
music continues. We keep changing with it. And, I think that I really enjoy having this conversation with you. How can people find out more about you and your work?
You can please simply BrianBricklin.com, BrianBricklin.com. My site's in a transition period. I got it in WordPress. I have to start doing my own updates, but there's plenty there that you can check out, and you can certainly get in touch with me if you'd like to.
Well, we're here with Brian Bricklin, a wonderful singer, songwriter, artist, musician, recording artist, audio engineer, and everything in between. A man who's been in the business for his whole life, and so glad you could join us today, Brian.
Thank you, and thank you for doing a show like this. Music does matter. And it matters a lot to me. And it was great to be able to be on this podcast with you and just share my life and just some of the stuff I've been up to. And, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. So thank you very much.
Look forward to having you back on again.
Love to. Thanks you very much.
Thank you for joining us on Music Matters with Jason Tramm. Please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on our upcoming guests and topics. Follow us on social media. We're on all the big platforms, and you can also hear us on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify as well. Thank you so much, and remember, keep music alive.